Hello and welcome to a new series on how an RC car actually works. So we're going to break this down into 3 videos. We're going to go about the chassis, I'll explain what that means in a minute. Then we're going to go with the electrics, I'll explain that in another video. And then we'll go about actual racing, how the racing actually works. So we're going to kick off with the chassis video right now. So this is my racing car currently, and I'm going to show you around. So let's get this off. So this is called a body shell, and this sits on top of the actual car, and it makes it look cool. And if we look, we can see it has what they call a rear wing, and you can see this little lip at the front. Now both of those are made to give it downforce, which is using the air to push the car into the ground and give it more grip. This is the chassis. It's made fully or mainly out of carbon fibre, which is very strong and very light. It also has a little bit of flex in it, so that when you're going around a corner, it's not really stiff. It can just go around it very nicely. So we'll start with the suspension. On most touring cars, you will get suspension like this, on these style ones anyway. And if I can get a closer shot, they have springs on the outside and they have oil on the inside. So if we look, when I push these things up, see it's got a bit of resistance there. So that's the spring and the oil coming together. So inside of here, there is a little piston. So if we open this shock up here, this is off one of my other cars. So this is called actually a shock, and that's actually called the spring. So you can see there, it compresses. So let me open it up and show you what's inside. So if we take off this little plastic rubber-like cap, not sure if you'll see it on camera, but there is. I can focus on that. There's some oil in there. Now if we bring this up to the top, you may be able to see that little thing there. That's got a piston around it, that circle in the middle, and it's got a few holes in it. So basically, it depends on how many holes you have, but if you have more holes, it means the shock will be softer because the oil can pass through it more easily. If you have less holes, it'll be stiffer because it's harder for the oil to pass through. So if we put this all back together. So once you've got your shock built, you can change, if I wind this in here, you'll see that this gap gets shorter. Now that's changing the ride height. So on this car, for reference, this car with tyres on will sit roughly 5.5 to 6 millimeters at the front, and then sort of 6.2 millimeters from the ground at the back. So they are very low. And you consider when F1 cars, they're about 35 millimeters up. So just think of how much closer to the ground these cars are and how stable they are going around a corner. So at the front and the back of the car, you have these gears here, which are connected to the motor via some belts. So you'd think these are pretty brittle, but actually they've been quite reliable to me at the moment. I haven't had to replace any. You can set the tension of these, so you should do that as a regular service. So it's like quite, you can see how loose it is, and you'd think that would hit something, but it doesn't actually do that. So at the front, it's literally a gear. So if I turn this side, you'll see that one turns the exact same way. So I'm turning it that way, and I'm turning it forward, and that one's going forward. Whereas if I look at the rear, I'm going to turn this one forward. See how it's going backwards? That's because it has a differential, which means that it's got gears in there which will change the way it comes out on the other side, and you can change the stiffness of this by changing the oil. So you can lock these up, which would be the same as the front, but you can also change the oil in there to be quite thick so that it's almost there but it's not quite locked, which is what most people do. As in some of the rules, you're not allowed to have a locked diff, so they'll have a very, very tight but still turnable. So you can hold one side and turn it like this. See how it's turning this, and I'm holding this side, and this side's not moving. Whereas if I tried to do that on the front, and I hold this side and I turn it, I can't turn it at all. I've just really hurt my fingers. So what this actually does is it means that the inside wheel can turn at a different speed to this one. So now we're going to go into what understeer and oversteer is. You may have heard this before, but it can be confusing. So basically oversteer, think of it as drifting. We've all seen cars drifting around. Think of oversteer as that. Now understeer is when you turn like that, but the car goes straight on. However, most racers actually prefer to have understeer as opposed to oversteer because it's easier to drive. So the more talented drivers of us, not me included, will have they'll have less understeer. They'll probably have a diff at the front so that they can turn at different speeds, which means they won't get as much understeer. However, that is harder to drive. That's why the experts drive it instead, and not people like me. I've picked the camera up for this one, and you can see the steering is fairly simple. So this servo can go left and right when you turn the remote. It's connected to a servo horn. So this one's made out of aluminium. Then that's just a spacer. And you have a tie rod, which means you can like twist it and it will be longer or shorter. And then so you can make the wheels straight. Then you've just got some bearings, which are just things that make it move freely in that shape. You've got two tie rods off to the sides, so when I turn it, you can see if it was to go that way, it would turn it right, otherwise left. And also, you might think, hang on a second, why is that one so much more of an angle than that one? Well, that's called Ackerman, and that's where the inside wheel turns more than the outside, and that normally gives you better angle. So if I was going into a corner, I'd get more angle with that than I would if both were more similar. There is an abundance of things that you can tune on a touring car, which I'm not going to go into today because they'll just make you confused. But you can also change something called toe. So actually, if you look at my feet now, I've got toe out, which means my feet are not straight, they're pointing that way, yeah? So think of it as that. So my toes are out. So if we look at the front of the car, you might be able to see, might not be able to, but they are actually angled outwards, which is called toe out. So the car, it's not exactly straight, and that's going to help with going into a corner. It's already got a bit of it's already kind of turning into a corner if you think about it. When it's turning in, it's got less way to go. And on the rear, you normally have toe in. So imagine my feet were like that, which makes me look like I need the toilet on the rear, and that just makes the car more stable, unlike me when I'm doing that. But you'll have to work around with that one. Here are the gears if you're interested. So the motor has one gear coming off of it. We'll talk about that in a separate episode, what the motor is and what it's like, what you can get. And then it's got a gear called a pinion, which is like the driven gear. You have a spur gear, which is the drive gear. So you can see when I turn this one, it turns the pinion, but the pinion would turn this. This then turns this gear and this gear, which go off to the gears on the back, which then go outwards to the wheels with them drive shafts in there. And on the front with this gear here. So if I pull this belt here, you'll see it moves the front wheels. And same with the rear. And that's all done by this motor and all these different gears and the belts. So last little thing, these are body mounts on here. So they're literally just posts with holes in them so that you can just lay it on top. If you cut these correctly, it'll just sit perfectly on there, which, not to brag, but I have. You get a clip here, and this straight bit here is going to go into that hole. Like that. So that holds the body on. When you put these on, we normally leave a little bit of flex so that if you have a crash, it's not going to be crack like that. It's going to have that bit of play to help it. I mean, if you were a proper racer, if you were winning championships and that, you might have it low down for aerodynamics, but for a beginner, kind of like me, that's perfect. So that pretty much covers this episode. Don't come at me, racers, saying I've missed a lot of things, because that's kind of the point of this episode, is that I just want beginners to get to know the cars. Yeah, so please like, subscribe, put a comment, just a nice one. Stay tuned, because we're going to have 2 more episodes coming up shortly.